everybody, it's Gina. Welcome to the Library Mouse and welcome to another book tag. Today I am doing another end of 2025 book tag. This is the best, worst, and most surprising reads. And this was originally created by Justin at Triumphal Reads, and I was tagged by Suey over at Suey's Book Banter. Actually, I love doing this tag because it really forced me to look at what did I read in 2025. So luckily, I've put everything in Storygraph, so it's super easy to do this tag. So let's get started. All right, so I originally planned to read 60 books for 2025. My goal was 5 books a month. I wound up reading 34 books. And the first prompt is, what was the longest book? So the longest book that I read was a book called The Sisters of Summit Avenue by Lynn Cullen. It is historical fiction. It was 525 pages. Basically, it is the story of 2 estranged sisters, one of whom is married to a man that has this infamous sleeping sickness that devastated families across the country in the 1930s. I'd never heard of it before. So I found that the book was very interesting, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So that was my longest book. The second prompt is, what is my shortest book that I read? So the shortest book that I read, so I'm going to say 2, because one was very niche nonfiction, and it was a little historic paperback about the history of Letchworth State Park. And that's some local history for me. That was 130 pages. But the next book, more mainstream book that I read that was the shortest, was Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. And this was a memoir on how she was dealing with her grief after her husband passed away. And that book is 207 pages. It was written in 2025. So prompt number 3 is new favorite author. So there were quite a few authors that I read for the first time in 2025. One of those authors is Lori Lico Albanese, and she wrote the book Hester. Hester is a reimagining of the woman who inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne's Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter. It was some magic along with some history. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I definitely would like to read more of her books. Have I read more of her books? No. But I did enjoy getting to know her as an author for the first time last year. Another person that I really enjoyed was Amelia Hart's Wayward. So Amelia Hart, I loved Wayward, but I have to say that I didn't love her book, The Sirens, as much. But she's still like one of my top favorite new to me authors of 2025, which was Amelia Hart. The next prompt is a book that made me happy. And I was just looking through my list and I was like, wow, I feel like I read a lot of heavy books last year, but a couple books that made me happy. One of them was The Rosie Project by Graham Simpson. I thoroughly enjoyed that book. It made me smile. I loved the humor in it. It was very lighthearted. I gave it 4.5 stars, and it definitely was one of my top books of 2025. He also is a new to me author that I really enjoyed. And I believe there are more books to the Rosie series. I have not read them, but definitely something I want to do this year. Another book that made me happy, sorry, it's the dog, was Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books. Now, I only gave that 4 stars, but it was fun. It was a fun little book. It made me happy. It was a nice distraction when I read it. I read it in March. So both of those. Lula Dean was written by Kirsten Miller, and The Rosie Project by Graham Simsian were books that made me happy. So the next prompt is the most depressing book. And as I was looking through my list, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. It was published in 1943. It was depressing. There was a lot of sadness in that book and a lot of heaviness. And even though it ended on a hopeful note, just the life and things that were going on around them, it was depressing and it was sad. And when I first read that book, I think I was a younger middle schooler, that there were parts of it that I didn't even remember. And I was like, oh, that's really disturbing. Or wow, that's depressing. And I didn't, maybe I skimmed it too much as a younger reader, but I really found that A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was depressing to me. And it was very heavy. It's probably one of the heaviest books that I read, besides the historical fiction book, The Sunflower House, which took place during pre-World War II Germany, I believe, when they were trying to get women to have more babies for the perfect Aryan race. And that was depressing also. The Sunflower House was an excellent book, though. It's written by Adriana Allegri. Great nonfiction, which focuses on something different for a World War II historical fiction book. So I do recommend it, but it's depressing because of the nature of what was happening during the book. The next prompt is the book that I've thought about the most. And, you know, I can't say that any of them have stood out in my mind that I think about, because I'm having to scroll through my story graph to remember the books. But as they are coming up, I think A Man Called Ove really stood out to me. I loved the character. Here comes Henrietta. I loved the character. I felt very sad for him and the grief that he was feeling. But the sense of community and the way he grows as a character, and how others treat him and how he treats other people. I mean, it was just a very special book. And I think that book stands out the most to me out of the ones that I read last year. So the next prompt is a favorite cover. So I really thought that Wayward and Hester, I'll put them up here, had really beautiful covers. They're very similar, very floral. I love the color of Wayward. That's what made me want to read the book in the first place, was the cover. I thought that Cackle had a very interesting cover. You can tell just by looking at it that it's going to have something to do with witches. But I thought that it was a really cute cover, and it did catch my eye. So I would say that those 3 books probably had the most eye-catching covers out of the books that I read last year. Most likely to reread. So I do reread books. I can say that I'm not a rereader, but they're more comfort book reads. And as I'm looking at my list from last year, I don't think I'm going to reread any of them, to be honest. They were all good, you know, in their own right. But none of them are books that I put down and thought to myself, ugh, you know, I can't wait to read this again. So I don't think any of my books that I read in 2025 that I would reread again, which is kind of sad in a way, but I really don't reread a lot of books, which is why when I buy books for a home library, I really think about it before I buy them, because I want to know that I want to reread it. And it's why most of the books that I buy for a home library come from Goodwill. So in case I don't, or thrift store, in case I don't want to read it, I don't feel bad about spending a lot of money on it. Or they are nonfiction, because I do reread nonfiction because it comes in handy. An Underdog. Oh boy. What book was an underdog to me? I feel like the book Sweet Jiminy was an underdog. It's written by Kristen Gore. I had never heard of her as an author. I had never heard of her as a book. I've never heard of her as a book. I've never heard of that book before. It was published in 2010. It's historical fiction mystery. And it's probably a little underrated. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like she was a very good author. I enjoyed her style of writing. So I think Sweet Jiminy is probably underrated. I guess one thing that, a book that was a little frustrating was the book Save Me by Lisa Scott-Aline. I generally like her as an author. I felt like the plot was a little far-fetched. I like books to be realistic, and I realize that, you know, authors need to have some literary leeway to make their books more exciting or the plot more interesting. But I think that there are times when it needs to be believable. And as I was reading this, I'm like, really? Do you really think that would happen? So I guess in that way it was frustrating to me. I don't like it when authors resort to unbelievable things to make their plot move along or make it more exciting. I gave that 3.5 stars. Most disappointing. Well, I have been waiting to get to the most disappointing because this was so thoroughly disappointing to me. And it was the book The Life She Was Given by Ellen Marie Weisman. I love Ellen Marie Weisman. I love her books. Love them. This book, I was so disappointed in this book. I only gave it 2.5 stars. It was the worst book that I read last year. I felt like I gave it 2.5 stars because it was, well, this was another book. This was a depressing book. Nothing good happened to the main character. Absolutely nothing. I felt that there was a time when the book could have turned around, but it was all just one bad thing after another, after another, after another in this book. It was depressing to read, and I was thoroughly disappointed in it. And I have not read another Ellen Marie Weissman book, even though I do generally enjoy her books. This one just, I was disappointed, so disappointed in it and so depressed by it. Now, there's 3,290 reviews on Storygraph with a 3.9 score. And yeah, I don't get it. It was just not a good book for me. So that was my most disappointing book of 2025. The next two books are the most over and the most underhyped. And I can't really say anything fits that because I tend not to read books at the time they are being hyped. And so a lot of books that I pick up to read are more obscure books or books that aren't on everybody's mainstream reading list. I feel like a Frida McFadden book. I read one Frida McFadden book last year. It was The Wife Upstairs. I gave it 4.5 stars. I feel like Frida McFadden is very overhyped, but I liked the book and I thought it was well written. Obviously it was a thriller, it was a dark mystery, but I liked it. Maybe that is, but this book itself has not been hyped. Like, I haven't heard people hype The Wife Upstairs by Frida McFadden. I've only heard Frida McFadden hyped. So that could possibly be my underhyped book. But I haven't really read anything that I would consider overhyped. I feel like Wayward was hyped and I gave it 5 stars. It was my only 5-star last year. I gave The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver 4.5 stars. I gave The Rosie Project 4.5 stars. Wayward 5. Wow. And The Girl Who Drank the Moon, that was a middle grade fantasy. I gave that 4.5 stars. The Wife Upstairs, I gave 4.5 stars. The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer, I gave 4.5 stars. So those were my top books of 2025 that I gave 4.5 stars to. What did I give The Man Called Ove? Oh, I think I gave Ove. Maybe I gave that 5 stars. I didn't put it on my Storygraph, but I will find out. I read that in February. So A Man Called Ove, I gave 5 stars. I thought so. Okay, the last prompt is, what did I wish I had read in 2025? I can't say that I wish I had read any book, because that's the great thing with reading. The books are always there. So if you didn't read it in 2025, you can read it in 2026. And there's nothing I felt like that had that time parameter on it. Like, oh, I really wish I had read it last year, because me reading it at that point in time would have like been special or made a difference in my life somehow. And I really can't think of any book that I can think of that, you know, fits that. Whatever I didn't read in 2025 that I hope to read, I'm just pushing to my TBR. And the only thing I can say is I wish I had read more classics in 2025, because I did not fulfill that challenge. And so I'm really working on fulfilling that challenge this year, is reading 6 classics for the year for Suey's Classic 6 Challenge. I wish I had read more translated books. trying to enjoy that more. I did try to read one translated book from Japanese, and yeah, I DNF'd it. I think it was The Cat Cafe, something similar. If I still have the book, I'll link it up here. But anyway, that was the best, worst, and most surprising books of 2025. Hopefully, maybe you'll find some new books to read after listening to me talk about the more obscure books that I have read last year. So on that note, happy reading, and I'll see you on the next video.